Today we're looking at the biggest draft busts within the last 10 years. Players that were hyped up to an extreme level, or that were anticipated to be great so they were drafted very early on, and then for one reason or another never turned out to be nearly as good as expected. Now I will say that some people might be expecting guys like Andrew Wiggins or Jabari Parker to be on this list, but I mean, even though Wiggins isn't anywhere near living up to the hype right now, he's still averaging nearly 20 points a game on his career so far, so I can't really consider him a bust, just overhyped. And same for Jabari. He's been in some bad situations, faced some injuries, but it's averaged around 15 a game when healthy, so there's still time for him. And to start off part 1, we're going back to 2010 to look at Evan Turner, whose game just really never translated to the NBA. So he's been known as more of a role player for most of his career. And in high school, things were off to a decent start for him. By the end of his junior season, Evan was a top 25 prospect in his class, and by the end of his senior season, he was ranked as high as the 7th best small forward in his class, which led to him being a 4-star recruit going into his first year at Ohio State. And from there, it was a pretty slow climb for him. In his 3 seasons that he attended, Evan Turner averaged 8-4-2 as a freshman, 17-7-4 as a sophomore, then jumped up to 29-6 as a junior, and even shot a solid 36% from 3 in his 3 years at Ohio State, which led to him becoming known as having the best all-around game going into the 2010 NBA draft. People were even saying Evan Turner was just a bigger version of Brandon Roy, and if that was true, he would have been unstoppable. So there was no doubt in anyone's mind that Turner was gonna go second overall behind John Wall. But once Evan landed in the league, he did have some bright spots early on, but eventually it was very clear that he wasn't much more than an average player. He's one of those guys that had such a good all-around game, but never excelled at any one thing, so he really just became average at everything. And that's how his entire career's gone. He's only averaged double digits in 3 of his 9 seasons played, and after going second overall, he's really only been known as a role player. Then next, there's Anthony Bennett, and at first, I really wasn't even gonna include Bennett in this video, because I was thinking, well, he wasn't supposed to get drafted even in the top 5. It's not his fault that he got taken first overall and wasn't a good player, so I didn't really think he should be considered a bust. But then I was thinking, it doesn't matter where he was drafted, he sucked and absolutely is a bust, and rightfully considered as possibly the biggest bust in NBA history. I mean, everyone, including the commentators, were shocked that night that the Cavs picked Bennett, and they should have been because it was an unexpectedly terrible decision. But like I said, Bennett was supposed to be drafted in the lottery somewhere around the 6th or 7th pick. And he got there by playing great in high school, getting ranked as the #1 overall forward and the 7th overall player in his senior season. Then in college he was still good, averaging 16-8 on 37% from 3, all while being extremely efficient with a recorded PER of 28.3 on the year. A number that in the NBA was a similar PER that guys like Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and LeBron James have all recorded in recent seasons. But as we know, college and the NBA are a big difference, which was why in his rookie season his PER was 1.1. Take that in for a minute. 1.1. To put that in comparison, Kwame Brown, who's also been considered as one of the biggest busts ever, his PER in his rookie season was 11.2. So Bennett's was 10 times worse than Kwame Brown's. And that makes sense because, I mean, it took him 5 games to make his first shot in the NBA. It was a 3-pointer and he finished that game with 3 points, officially having gone 1 for 20 in his first 5 games. And I mean, as we know, it really didn't get any better from there. It took him 33 games to score double digits, and he was traded after the season and will proceed to play for 4 teams in 4 years, before completely being out of the NBA until this upcoming season, where the Rockets are giving him a second chance. And as you can probably tell, I wouldn't get your hopes up for him. And speaking of players who were given a second chance, we have Jimmer Fredette, who recently got his this past year on the Suns, but we'll get to that. To start out, Jimmer started playing basketball at 4 years old, and his older brother said he was the most competitive 4-year-old he'd ever seen. By 5, he was able to hit 3-pointers, and his dad built him a dribbling studio in their basement. Then by 10, his brother knew Jimmer was going to make it to the NBA, and by high school he was by far the best scorer in his area and broke all kinds of local scoring records in his school and in the state of New York. But because of his limited athleticism, he was only ranked as a top 75 shooting guard in his class, and didn't get too many high-profile scholarships, so he went to BYU. And he slowly developed there, but he developed so much that by his senior year he was the best scorer in college basketball and averaged 29 a game while fighting double and triple teams all year long. And he was a fan favorite and known for shooting deep threes every game. Something that's a lot more common in today's game, but wasn't back then and still isn't in college basketball. So he was eventually named the 2011 National Player of the Year, but then he dropped down to getting drafted 10th overall because of his athleticism and defense. So right off the bat, those things weren't expected of him. But I mean, he came into the league not being a good scorer either. He couldn't adjust to scoring over the bigger competition, and he really always needs the ball in his hands to play how he likes. Something that no NBA teams were willing to allow, which was why he only started 7 games in his NBA career. He never lost his ability to score though, because I mean he put up 37 a game in China, which was why the Suns gave him another chance in the league. But after only 6 games to end the season, he only averaged 3 points a game. So they declined his player option for this upcoming year, and now he's back to playing overseas. Which makes it safe to say that when transitioning to the NBA, Jimmer Fredette really didn't turn out as good as everyone expected he would. And neither did Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. For MKG, I'll say that even at the time, he really didn't have any business going 2nd overall, let alone top 5. But he did, and here's why. In high school, he was a great player, ranking in as the 3rd overall player in his class and the best overall small forward. So he got recruited to Kentucky with Anthony Davis. And his showing along with AD's in the NCAA tournament played a huge part in him getting drafted so high. Even though he wasn't a good scorer, averaging 11 points a game and 25% from 3 in non-tournament games, he did have a couple of solid scoring games in the tournament. But even then, it wasn't his scoring that won people over. It was said to have been his elite level defense that would translate to the NBA, and his leadership that he showed on the floor, with it being argued that he was just as much of a leader as Davis was that year at Kentucky. So in 2012, the Charlotte Bobcats, who lacked in both defense and team leadership, drafted him with the 2nd overall pick over the likes of Bradley Beal, Damian Lillard, and Harrison Barnes. All while knowing he wasn't a good offensive player. And I mean, honestly, with MKG, nothing's changed since then. He's injury prone, still can't shoot threes, let alone really score in general, and isn't a great playmaker for the team. And on top of that, his defense never really translated either. For someone that was drafted mainly because of his potential on that end, he's never made an all-defensive team and is in no way thought of as an elite defender in today's game. And it's made him another guy that's turned out to be just a solid role player. Looking back, it was a terrible mistake picking him, but it was also just one of many for Charlotte. A team who also hasn't always been lucky with who they draft, with their top picks is the 76ers, like when they recently drafted Markelle Fultz 1st overall. Now of course there's plenty of time for him to get back on track, and by no means am I saying his career is over. But if we're making a video on draft bust today, at this moment, Markelle Fultz is a certified bust, and I won't spend too long talking on him because we all know his situation. Drafted 1st overall, was said to have been the point guard version of James Harden, and looked great, but ever since being drafted has been a part of maybe the weirdest story in NBA history. I mean, this just came to mind on the spot, but can we please get a Markelle Fultz cameo in Space Jam 2 of the Monstars taking his talent? I mean, it's perfect. He wouldn't even have to act to play his part. But seriously, signs still aren't looking great, and if things don't change soon, he will go down as a bigger bust than Anthony Bennett. And while we're speaking of the 2017 class, same thing, there's plenty of time left, and I think he will get better eventually, but if Lonzo Ball doesn't, with all the hype he had coming into the league thanks to his family and even Magic Johnson, Lonzo may also go down as a bust if things keep going how they have. But honestly, being on the Pelicans, as well as him not being so connected with LeVar, will be a good reset for him and give him a great chance of finally becoming the player he was expected to, if he stays healthy. And while we're on the subject of the 76ers, that brings up Jahlil Okafor, who wasn't your typical draft bust, because he was a top player all throughout high school, and in the class of 2014, Okafor was the #1 overall draft prospect, ahead of guys like Karl Anthony Towns and D'Angelo Russell. And then by the time he got to Duke, he was 6'11", 275 pounds. And even though he statistically only ended up averaging a decent 17 and 8, he overall had a great season and led his team to the NCAA championship. And that, along with his potential, led to Philly taking him 3rd overall. Even though Towns and Russell ended up outranking him in the minds of scouts once they got to college, he was still thought of as just as great of a talent in everyone's mind and deserved to go top 3. And he did, and then he got to the NBA, and there's no doubt that the talent was still there. But as I've gone through in a couple of videos recently, he quickly got left behind. His game no longer fit into today's NBA, and he got replaced in Philly by Joel Embiid. And that's why he's considered a bust. Not necessarily because he didn't have the talent, or even because his game just didn't translate. It was because he's one of the unfortunate ones that was just a few years too late. He would have been great in another era, but not in this current one. And as I've said before, there's still hope for him, but as of right now, I think we can all consider Jahlil Okafor as one of the biggest busts, mainly for how he's turned out since being in the league.